Okay, well, good evening. Welcome those of you who drove out here to our Phoenix office to attend our presentation on juniors deer hunting, and welcome to those of you in cyberspace who are sitting in the comfort of your office watching it on your computer. The advantage to watching it on your computer, obviously, is that you get to attend the seminar, plus you get to make sure that you get all your homework done. You think? So, this evening we're going to talk about some of the tips and some clues on how to hunt deer, and we're specializing this evening on our juniors deer hunt. We're going to talk about the different juniors deer hunting areas that we have, and some of the techniques that you use to deer hunt, as well as some of those, if you haven't been deer hunting before, some of the things to think of and being prepared to go deer hunting. So with that, we'll get started. Tonight we're going to talk about getting prepared, getting ready to go deer hunting. We realize that a lot of times people, you have to start sometime, and everybody had to learn at some point in time how to hunt. A lot of us learned from our parents or from our grandparents, but there are those of us who are just getting involved in hunting right now who didn't have the advantage of a parent who hunted. So a lot of times we're having parents that are learning how to hunt at the same time that their kids are. And a lot of these presentations that we've been going through in the last couple of years are aimed at, they're twofold. They're teaching the younger generation kids how to hunt, and at the same time they're making sure that the parents have what they need to or are prepared for conditions they may face out while they're hunting or camping, and as well as giving tips on how to hunt. So being prepared, things to do prior to going to hunting. We're going to give some techniques on locating and seeing deer, when and where to find deer, shot placement and field care. This is when you get the opportunity to take a shot. We'll go over a few of the things on what is a good shot, what is not. Checking it out. This is particularly talking about the kaibab, where it's mandatory that deer be checked out. And once again, in northern Arizona, where we have condors, we're going to be talking about lead bullets or non-toxic bullets. Statewide, we have 20 juniors deer hunts this year, and that totals 2,005 deer tags. We'll get right into what it takes to be prepared. Without a doubt, a critical part of hunting is being able to shoot. Now, those of you who are here in the audience, do you guys go shooting regularly? Do you enjoy going shooting? Shooting is a skill that is developed, and it's not something that comes naturally. It's something that the more you practice, the better you will be. The keys are practice, practice, and more practice. Okay, taking the shot. Once you've gone through and you've been hunting and you have come to the time when it's time to take a shot, the number one thing that most people tend to do, that if they had to do it over again, they wish they could, is take your time. The vast majority of the time when it comes to taking a shot at something, you have more time than you will take. So take your time. The keys to a good shot, there's pretty much two. You control your breathing and squeezing the trigger. If you've been out shooting before, and if you're shooting with a scoped rifle, you know that you'll take a breath, you'll get seated into it, and then you'll relax, let that breath out, and you'll sit there and slowly squeeze the trigger. And there may come a time when you need to take another breath before you're ready to shoot, before the gun's ready to go off, and at that time, relax the trigger and take another breath. Now, there's a few things that I've always done with my kids when I've taken them hunting, and I think this is very important to making a good shot when you're out there. And if you guys have the time, I would really highly recommend this. And this is number 4 on our list, dry fire. And what I mean by that is not dry firing at home, This is if you have time, if you've observed a deer and you have time to set up, you're on a rest before I let my kids shoot. If you have time, is we'll build a rest. They set up, slowly squeeze the trigger, and dry fire. That means there's not a round in the chamber. There's not a bullet in the chamber. And every time I have ever done this with my kids, I'll watch them go, ugh, and they'll flinch. And you guys, if you don't know what that is yet, you will, because the excitement builds. You're very excited. You finally have the opportunity. You see something. You finally have an opportunity to shoot. And up here, number one, you're not taking your time, and you're rushing everything. And when it really comes time to being really critical that you take your time, you tend to rush it, and the thing you rush is the shot. And that dry fire kind of brings you back down, calms you down, and particularly if your dad's standing next to you and just say, you missed. But we didn't have a bullet in there. So then I always make them do it again. Click. And if the gun's not moving, and I ask them, the last question right there, where were your crosshairs? Where was the gun aimed when the gun went off? If they can tell you where the gun, if you guys think of this, if you know where your crosshairs were and where the gun was aimed when the gun went off, you will shoot much better. So when we're getting back to this dry fire, when they dry fire and the gun doesn't move and they tell me, yeah, I hit it that time, then we'll go ahead and put a round in, take their time, squeeze the trigger, and make a good shot. So I want you guys to think of that when you guys are out this year, if you have time, and it's only if you have time. That, I think, is a great recipe for success, is being able to sit there and take a good shot. Something else that I want to talk about real quick, and this is about taking the shot, happens to do with what firearm you guys are using. When my kids became old enough that I was taking them deer hunting and elk hunting, they used all of my rifles, and my rifles were big for them. So we're shooting a 270 at deer and something bigger for elk. And I invested and took them down to a local gunsmith and put a muzzle brake on my rifles. And if you guys haven't ever shot with a muzzle brake, it will take your 270 or your 300 Winchester mag and make it into something that every one of your kids will be able to comfortably shoot. And I highly recommend it. I'm not a gunsmith, and I'm not going to promote any one guy, but I'm a firm believer in a muzzle brake to where it will increase the volume that comes out to the sides. But essentially, just a real quick lesson in ballistics, what a muzzle brake does, essentially when you pull the trigger and the primer is detonated, it burns all that powder, creates a tremendous volume of gas, and that gas pushes the bullet out the barrel. Well, there's no recoil that has occurred yet. The recoil is not going to occur until the bullet leaves the end of the barrel. And when the bullet leaves the end of the barrel, just like a jet exhaust, all that air goes and pushes that gun back. So that's where recoil comes from. What a muzzle brake does is it's about a 2-inch, looks like part of your barrel, device that screws into the front of your barrel. It doesn't screw into where something that we can do, but a gunsmith will put it on. And it has a series of holes in it that allow that gas to be vented at right angles to itself, 180 or at right angles, 90 degrees from the travel of the bullet. So as the bullet passes each series of holes, gas is released at 90 degrees to the point where as the bullet finally pushes its way out the end of the barrel, most of the gas has been vented at 90 degrees to each other, and there's not very much gas left to push the rifle back into you. The flip side of that is there's a lot of noise that comes out that side. So some of them are noisier than others. You can keep that in mind. If you're shooting with a muzzle brake, you don't want to be over here. There's a cone that the sound is not quite as loud. It's no different than a regular rifle to the shooter. To the people next to you, it might be louder. But to your kids shooting, it makes a huge world of difference. it takes that recoil into something that you guys will all be able to comfortably shoot. So a little bit on calibers. It allows you to shoot a caliber of sufficient energy that you want to shoot a deer or an elk with. Personal supply list. It's always a good idea to make a list before you go. You know, I try to make a list for just about everything. But when you're going to go out for a weekend, there's a lot of things to remember. And if you forget any of them, it's not like you can walk back into the garage or back into your office and pick something up. So make a list. You can't really start making a list early enough. You list real important items: hunting licenses, tag, a knife, flashlight batteries. And the whole purpose of this is to eliminate forgetting an item. I'm going to go back to that list. If you look at that little list, if you can read it, that list right there, if you forgot 2 things on that, and I guarantee you that if you don't have a list, there's 16 items there. If you don't have a list, you're going to forget a couple of those. So if you forgot your gun or bullets, you're going to have a tough time hunting. Your license or tag, that's once again a necessity. A knife, I guess the only thing you could really forget, you don't really need a flashlight unless it gets dark. Plastic bags and toilet paper. So lists, camp supplies, hunting supplies, and that's something that you guys, you kids, can do. You can help Dad make a list and help him remember everything. It'll be a big help. It really will be. GPS. Do you guys know what that is? Yeah? The whole GPS system, and I'm going to go just real briefly into what it is, but it's a system that, based on satellites spinning around the Earth, allow you to find your position anywhere on the globe, and depending on what margin of degree of error is plugged into it at the time, it's remarkably accurate. It has pretty much replaced the old-time compass. That, once again, the trick about a GPS is it's an electronic unit that when your batteries die, it becomes not a GPS unit. I once had mine that, when I turned it on, it said all stored data has been lost. Batteries weren't dead. It gave me a message, I have nothing for you. But a GPS unit, I'll tell you, I've had one for quite a while. I'm not one of those people that gets easily turned around in the woods, but it's kind of a trinket. I like to kind of play with it. But I'll tell you, the true value for us parents that take our kids hunting is I taught my kids how to use GPS unit the very first time we left the truck. And all day long, I give them the GPS unit and say, I want you to turn it on. I want you to tell me how to get back to the car. You know, things happen while you're out there. You never know what's going to happen. But it's a comfort knowing that regardless of what happens, we're not lost. We have a GPS unit. And it's a big help, and it's a benefit to being able to have your kids get back in the dark. You know, turn that thing on and follow a lighted arrow back to their truck or your truck. Obviously, there's many uses. Being able to go back to a point wherever you were is much easier with a GPS unit. Maps. Regardless of what type of map it is and what type of detail you want to look at, maps, I don't know if I go hunting anywhere without a map. I'm not sure if I go fishing anywhere without a map. It allows you to get around in areas that you don't know well. Allows you to be able to figure out the shortest way to get to wherever you need. If you're looking at some maps, it allows you to tell whether or not you're in your right unit to where you can actually go hunting versus the wrong unit. But always get a map. I would highly recommend always having one for wherever you're at. Our website, our Game and Fish website, has a lot of information that is available. Things about upcoming events, news items, what to do with your wildlife after you've gone hunting. But there's detailed information on your specific units. Give you tips, give you up-to-date information. general areas on where you can go. Okay, a pack and hunting supplies. Now this is something that there's an almost infinite supply of things that you can carry with you anymore that are available. But there's some truly that I wouldn't go without. There's some that you don't necessarily need all the time. But everything that we have right here, I myself am always going to have a backpack. And in that backpack are going to be a few things. In my backpack, I'm going to carry my license and tag is probably in the pocket of that backpack. I tend not to carry my wallet or any ID in my pockets just because I've lost them out of my pockets before. I'll keep them in some little waterproof thing, a Ziploc bag or something, and I'll have that in my backpack. I do have flagging. Flagging really helps you if you're trailing something, allows you to figure out where your last spot of blood, where your last bit of sign indicating what direction something may have went. If you're by yourself, it really helps a lot. You can look back and see. Rope. I usually have rope to allow me to hang something if I need to. A compass. Do I have a compass anymore? No. What do I have, though? I have my GPS unit, right? I don't carry a compass anymore. I carry a GPS unit. I don't have that big back frame with me, but that's something that I definitely bring. If you have something, a deer or an elk, that's something you need to pack a ways back to camp or your truck, I have that pack frame sitting in my truck. Game bags are in my truck or back at camp. I always have a knife in my pack. I always have many knives in my pack. And I usually don't use a saw. There's a deer tag. Binoculars. One of the most important things that you can take with you when you go hunting are your binoculars. Inside my pack, I actually have a little bag that has a whole variety of survival type things that I'll go months without ever opening up. About the only time I open it up is to make sure that my matches are still matches and haven't turned into little pieces of wood covered with red and white dust. So I keep, in my little pack, I have 2 ways to make a fire. You guys probably remember that from Hunter Ed or from Boy Scouts or something. Everyone recommends you have at least 2 different ways to start a fire, because when you need your matches, they're going to be wet. And in spite of that saying those matches are waterproof, they're not going to work as well as you think they're going to work. So I always have a couple different ways with me that I can start a fire if I need one. I do have extra batteries in my pack. They're not in my little red survival kit. But I even have a little fire stick in there. But these are all things to keep with you to being prepared. You know, in that little red thing, I have aspirin. I've got some Band-Aids. I have some Neosporin. A little first aid kit just in case I have a nick or something that I want to take care of. But once again, here on the bottom, probably the most important thing when you're going out is to let somebody know where you're at. And this maybe isn't as important for you guys getting lost, but this might be important if for some reason somebody at home wants to get in touch with you. And they know where you're at, so they can call us. We can radio the local game warden. He can go right to your camp, or he knows in a very small area where to look for your camp. Types of knives. Once again, I mentioned I have a lot of knives with me. You know, at least 3 or 4, and some way to sharpen them. Whoops, we zipped through that. You know, when you get to the point when you're going to use a knife, it's going to be to clean something. And it's surprising how quickly, if your knife isn't real sharp to start, it won't be very usable as a knife very long. So the advantage to having multiple knives with you is you can have 3 or 4 real sharp knives with you. You know, they're lightweight. They have composite handles now. There's a whole variety of knives that you can have that don't take up much space or weight. I have a little diamond bitted sharpener with me that allows me to just keep my knives sharp as I go. I only have a couple that I use all the time, and I have a couple in there for spares in case I don't have one of the ones that I think I should have in my pack. Okay, now we're going to go over locating and seeing deer. It's not always quite that easy. First thing you need to know, or is greatly going to improve your chances of seeing a deer, is being able to recognize what deer sign is and know that you're in an area where deer live before you see one. Most likely you're going to see a pellet group or you're going to see deer tracks before you see a deer. And this sign is evidence that they live here. Areas to look around water. Obviously, deer need to drink regularly. That's a good place to look for them, is around a water hole or a drinker. Although, depending on the time of year and the overall temperature and how long it was since it last rained, they might not need to go to that water hole to get a drink anymore. Well, an area where they went to all the time in the summer, if you did any scouting and found them there, if it's raining, they're not going to go back to that water hole. They don't need to, obviously. Being able to read sign is kind of another way to paraphrase how fresh the sign is. That's something that you get much, much better with practice. You know, looking at the track and being able to tell if it's very sharp or are they dull and faded. If you look at the deer track up there in the upper right-hand picture, you can see that center ridge real sharp. You can be able to look at the track and you'll be able to see that everything is well defined. The track itself is real smooth. If you look into a coyote track or a lion track or any type of track other than a hoof, you'll be able to see the dimpling from the pads in the track real well. So the fresher the track, the more detail you're going to be able to see. Has it rained recently? You know, rain is going to erase just about most of the sign that's out there, depending on how hard it rains. But it's going to, if it doesn't rain so hard that it's going to wash them out, at least you're going to be able to see raindrops inside that deer track. So rain is the best way, at least if you know this was made after the rain and it rained 2 days ago, you know at least this deer track, this deer was here less than 2 days ago. Now this is maybe the stereotypical deer photo that you'll see in TV, but this is not most likely what you're going to see while you're out hunting. Here's a few examples of deer found in more typical hunting situations. Obviously, this deer, he's no longer feeding. He's bedded up. And when deer bed, they tend to almost always sit in the shade. They'll be more secretive. They don't necessarily want to be bothered. But at the same time, they want to bed in such a place that's going to provide them the ability to look around. You know, deer are a prey species, and there are things out there that will eat them. And they want to make sure that nothing such as a mountain lion can sneak right up to them without them having an opportunity to see it or smell it. So they do tend to pick spots that are going to give them a little bit of advantage or a little bit of an advantage from a predator that may be sneaking up on them. Seeking brushy or shady areas. They might be hiding. They might be seeking shade from the sun. And you have to specifically look for them. Oftentimes when they're in bedding areas, they're relatively, some areas, the bedding areas are relatively few. And you can sit there and go hunt an area, and you can deer hunt all day long, even when the deer aren't up and active, just because you can sit there and work an area and glass their bedded areas. And you can easily glass up bedded deer if they're visible and if you're looking for them. A lot of times they'll bed in such a way that you have to be very, very close to them before you'll see them, if you're able to see them before they get up and run off. But it's pretty typical when you're in areas, you know, such as this picture of this mule deer right here. You know, from the top of that hill in the background, you'd be able to easily glass up that deer. If you're on this side of it, glassing back, this deer's backlit by that sunny grass. So you're easily able to pick them up based on the contrast. Using binoculars. Now, binoculars is a technique that's definitely learned. And the more time that you spend on a vantage point using your binoculars, the more wildlife you will see. You have to be in an area that's going to allow you to see a lot of country. Obviously, if you're on a real thick juniper or pine-covered hill being able to see something as small as this auditorium, chances are you're not going to see as much as you would when you're maybe still hunting or working that country real slow. But if you're in an area where you can see for a long ways and you can see a lot of country, a good set of binoculars and sitting there and just glassing the whole day is the way to go. Steadier the glasses are held, the more clear and less blurry the field of view will be. It's kind of self-explanatory, but if you look at that gal there looking through binoculars, that would typically be, if you were walking along or still hunting, that's how you would take a look at something that you already see. Or you're going, I wonder if anything's over there, or what is that spot right there? And you'll take a quick look at it. This isn't the posture you would use to sit there and glass for an extended period of time over a large area. So kind of the same shooting positions apply when you're thinking in terms of using your binoculars. Stability. Stability equals steady. There's a couple ways you can definitely make your binoculars more steady. If you're driving along and want to look at something, you can get out and look on the bedside, I guess. Obviously, that's steady. But if you're out on the side of a hill, that's steady. That's a way that, that's a real common, good, steady position to use your binoculars. If you don't have a tripod, which is what we'll look at next, that position right there, sitting down with your elbows on your knees, is the steadiest position you're probably going to get. But using a tripod, either with a spotting scope or with your binoculars, it's amazing how much more a tripod adds to the distance you can easily see with your binoculars. I'm going to guess it will double or triple the distance that you're able to see. When you put your binoculars on a tripod, the first thing you'll notice is how many birds there are in the world. Because you're going to be seeing birds flying around. You're going to detect little animals moving at distances that just because you couldn't keep your binoculars steady before, that you wouldn't be able to keep it, you wouldn't be able to see them. You wouldn't be able to detect them. Now, the advantage to being able to detect movement is that you'll see more than just birds. You're going to see slight movements of whatever animal it is that you're looking that you wouldn't be able to detect before. Technique. And this is technique with a tripod. Usually there's two things that people do with a tripod, pair of binoculars on a tripod. One is to grid it either up and down. A lot of it depends on your tripod and how easy it moves. People that use, I know when I have my binoculars on a tripod, I move them with my nose or my cheek. I don't keep my hands up here because that takes a lot. So you can adjust your tripod to where it barely moves or it easily moves with little movement. And you can sit there and grid it either up and down or side to side. And then if you're going to change elevation, you can get up and move it with your hand. But when you do this with a tripod, if you guys haven't ever done it before, I really recommend it. You sit there and you stare at a field of view until you're comfortable that there's nothing there. And then you bounce it the next field of view. So if you think in terms of circles, you're cutting circles out of the picture you see. And you can stare at that picture for as long as you have patience. That if you're sitting there for a minute and all of a sudden you see something and you look at it and all of a sudden you're looking at a deer ear and this thing just twitched and it was something you hadn't seen. Or on the other side of a tree you'll see a deer leg as it's walking through. And it will greatly increase the amount of wildlife you see. Looking for deer and other wildlife. And this is one of the keys whenever you're looking for anything. Don't look for the entire animal. Even though there's a lot of times you'll see the whole animal standing in the open, and there's a lot of times it's going to be looking at you, or you're going to be looking in an area to where you're not going to see the whole thing. You're going to see head, ears, you're going to see a piece of it, and not the whole animal. So you look for parts. It's real common when something is looking at you that this picture on the lower right is what you're going to see. If it's a doe, all you're going to see is an eye and an ear and a little bit of the nose there in the brush. Here's a picture of a deer tucked into the bushes. And here you're looking for contrast. You're looking for something that doesn't quite seem to jump out, or it doesn't quite seem to fit. And here it's the rear end of that deer with its tail. I think the face and head of that deer also looks like something you can pick out. You guys see that second one? That second, and that's an easy thing to miss, obviously, particularly when you're looking at the first one. But if you're looking long enough with your binoculars, you'd pick out that second one when he moved. Here we're looking at contrast. Same thing here. So really, when you're looking for wildlife here, even though particularly that deer down in the bottom picture, that deer is totally in the open. But what's going to draw your attention to it is the black tail, dark tail. Okay, there's a couple of neat pictures like this. You look at that, and you can definitely tell there's a few deer there. You're not sure how many. But when you see that deer standing in the open, like the one there to the left, you keep looking, and you're looking for parts and see how many deer that are there in this picture that you just don't see. So how many deer do we see in that picture before I hit the button one more time? Okay, done looking? Well, let's hit it one more time and see. There's 9 in there. And you can see bits and pieces of most of those, except for maybe that one in the upper left-hand corner. Doesn't really jump out. Okay, here's another picture. Glassing up bedded deer. When you see something, and this is kind of, be patient, particularly if they don't know you're there. Take your time and make sure you see everything. This is them all standing up. Six deer in the top picture. 14 deer in the bottom picture. And I actually think that bottom picture, they missed one. I think there's 15. That little stretch right, see if this laser works. I guess not. That cluster of 5 circles there right in the middle on the right-hand side, I think has 6 deer in it. If you look behind the one that's broadside, I think you see 2 ear tips over its back. So I think there's 2 deer in that picture right there. When and where to locate deer. Obviously, deer and all wildlife is most active early in the morning or later in the evening. Typically bed down during the middle of the day, but that doesn't mean that you can't find them or that they won't be up and around a little bit during the middle of the day. It's real common if you're in an area where you get to the middle of the day and you're just going to sit in one spot for the day in glass. And you're sitting in glass, and then you'll find a few bedded deer as you're there. And if you watch them throughout the day, they regularly get up every hour or so, and will feed for a little bit and then pop back down. Early in the morning, they tend to be out in the open areas, or in the evening, they'll work their way out into the open areas. So you got to realize in the morning, they've had all night to work their way out into openings while they're feeding. In the evening, they're just making their way from wherever it is that they bedded during the day, which tends to be thicker cover where they can, feel secure and safe, out into the areas where they're going to feed. It wouldn't be uncommon at all to find deer out in the middle of that great big opening at first light, but you probably wouldn't find them out there in the evening until they had a chance to get there. There's nothing out there in the middle of that picture that really would hold a bedded deer unless maybe a few of those trees there in that upper left-hand corner. So during late morning to midday, glass the heavier vegetated slopes and canyons. And once again, you're glassing the areas where they are going to either go to bed or they're going to be in a bed. If you look in this picture on the right-hand or lower right-hand corner, the right-hand portion of that photo where it kicks over into the juniper trees, either right on the edge on the top in the grass or down there in those trees, a deer will drop down in there to bed. If I was sitting here on this vantage point in the evening as it's starting to get dark, I'd sit there and glass that edge right there, right above those trees, waiting for deer to be coming out. Or if you look at a couple of those tree lines there, you can't really see them. They're just dark lines. But they're ridge tops where they have vegetation on north-facing slopes or east-facing slopes that are going to hold deer during the day. And they'll work their way out in the evening once they start becoming active. Once again, if you look in just about, particularly southern Arizona, there's always a very big difference between north and south-facing slopes. And by that I mean vegetation, what is growing on it. And if you think about it, it makes sense because the north-facing slopes tend to be moister and cooler just because they don't have the direct sun pounding on them, and the south-facing slopes do get the direct sun. So they'll be a little drier, a little warmer. Trees won't quite have the water, and precipitation won't last as long on those south-facing slopes. So you have a lower, less vegetation, less woody material, trees. Glass the shaded areas under rocky slopes and ledges. Although, if you haven't hunted this stuff before there in the lower right-hand corner, there might not be bedding areas that jump out at you. But if you have hunted that stuff before, then a few of the places I would naturally look right off the bat. That saguaro cactus there on the right-hand side, you'll see there's some shade and there's a couple of bushes, and I'd look for that. Look in there every time, something like that, because that would be a great place for a deer to bed. A clump of trees right in the middle obviously could hold deer. But a lot of times, particularly whitetail, they'll be down here in some of these mesquite or catclaw ridges with just a little bit of structure, whether it's that saguaro, some rocks, something to provide a little bit of shade, and they'll won't have any qualms about bedding in that open stuff. Midday and late afternoon, concentrate in the brush areas along ridges near canyon bottoms. Once again, they're just trying to get into it, particularly earlier in the fall. They're trying to get into cooler areas. If it's in January, during an archery season, or in December, sometimes you can catch these deer out there in the saddles, wide open saddles without, and they're just sitting in the sun, bedded in the sun. And once again, it's cool enough that they don't have to worry about keeping cool, so they'll bed in more open country. Here's a good example of something to pay attention to. If there's not a whole lot of areas for them to bed in, make sure you do look under what's there. It's real common to see deer under a single tree out in the very wide open country. 5 different mule deer were under this tree. Although, whoops. I think you can really only see 2. So we're going to assume there's a couple on the back side of that rock and behind the base. Sure.
The difference between does and bucks. Would the bucks stay in the trees more often than does kind of out moving around different parts of the year? Or different?
The question on just difference between does and bucks and really their activity period. Yeah, I mean, older bucks and younger bucks, the younger bucks would oftentimes be found in with does, particularly if you're hunting mule deer or even whitetail for that matter. But you might have a group of mule deer and there'll be a forked horn buck in it for sure. But early in the year, the kaibab's a great example of this. The kaibab has 2 hunts, and actually it has 3 hunts. The junior's hunt is the junior's hunt is in between the 2, but the late October hunt is really structured to take younger bucks. We're trying to shoot a lot of bucks off of the kaibab at that time. And it's a time when those younger deer tend to be a lot more visible. They're in with the does, and you can see them easily. Now later, at that time also in the early hunt, the rut hasn't started, so the bigger bucks haven't really started grouping up with the does. So proportionally, you're not taking very many older age class bucks. You still are, but they're just not quite as visible because they're not hanging in the open with the does. The later hunt is the converse of that, and that is a hunt. You'll hear all of our late hunts tend to be referred to as trophy hunts, and that's specifically because breeding season's kicking in, and those older age class deer tend to be, they may be solitary during the course of the year or with other bucks, but come the breeding season, they break up and go, and they're found in with the does at that time. So they're more visible. They tend to be in more open country, maybe, and they're more visible just because they're in with a bigger group of deer. So there's more deer to be seen, and once they're seen, they're found. Shot placement and field care. Responsible hunter is committed to only taking a shot that will ensure a quick and clean kill. Responsible hunter will only take a shot that he or she is confident will hit the vital area. Here's a little bit on bullet trajectory, and really the main point about this slide is, even though you can see something for a long ways out, know what your rifle is capable of doing, and more importantly, know how far you're capable of shooting. Obviously, a bullet does not travel in a straight line. A bullet is affected by gravity and is going to fall. So it's going to fall based on how far you're shooting, and it has a different point of impact. So know your firearm and know what you can comfortably shoot. That's really important. And how do you know that? Practice shooting. You got to practice shooting, guys. The technique of shooting is the same whether or not you're shooting a 270, something you're going to shoot for your rifle, or a 22, something you're going to be shooting while you're squirrel hunting. So it's really just learning how to shoot, being comfortable shooting, being comfortable on squeezing the trigger while maintaining your sight picture while you're squeezing the trigger. Practice. Just a quick review on some of the vitals. The vital area in terms of shot placement is the heart and lung area right there in the chest. One thing to avoid, and this is really the purpose of this slide more than anything, is that when you have the opportunity to take a shot, pick your point. Now, pick a point that you want to hit right. You can see where the front legs come up, right where the front leg intersects with the chest, about halfway up, a little under halfway, and right behind that line of front leg. Now, what will happen a lot is we as people are used to centering something, putting it right in the middle. So what we don't want you to do, and this is something that's only natural, so you really have to consciously think in terms of aiming, don't go length and go right in the middle, height and go right in the middle. And if you look at that, you can see where that point would be. It would be right in the middle of that deer, which over the long term would definitely be a mortal wound to that deer, that it's going to be very hard to recover that deer. So make sure you tuck that shot in right behind the front shoulder and squeeze the trigger. Shot placement. It's all about picking a spot. Once again, looking at the anatomy of a whitetail deer, think of And this has a little bit to do with the caliber and the energy of the bullet that you're shooting. One of the big reasons, like we talked about earlier about putting a muzzle brake on your rifle, is I always want my kids to be able to shoot something comfortably that has enough energy when it hits the target to do what it needs to do. Some of the smaller calibers, though legal, you have to be a very good shot. So even though you could take something like a 22-250 or a 222, a 223, you could take a deer hunting. In terms of energy and the size of the bullet that you're shooting, you look at everything that this bullet has to do. You have to go through muscles. First, you have to hit the hide. You have to go through it. Go through muscles. That bullet is shedding energy as it's going mushrooming. If you have to break a bone to get to the angle of your shot, one of these smaller caliber rifles might not have the bullet, might not have the energy in that caliber to do what needs to be done. And the last thing, once you've broke through the exterior of the deer, the skin, the muscles, the skeletal system, then you get into the vital organs. Okay, real quick. Is this a good shot? What do you guys think? Is this a good shot? I see you guys shaking your head no. You're right, that's not a good shot. But get back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. You always have a little bit more time than what you think you do. So what you do right here is you make sure you have a good rest. And I don't really think I touched on that enough when we were talking about taking a shot. I don't recommend any of you guys take an offhand shot at all. If it's a choice of taking a shot at something or offhand or not taking a shot, right now I'm going to tell you I'd recommend not taking a shot, at least when you're younger. Always take that extra little bit of time and get a good rest. To me, and when I'm hunting with my kids, and it's just not my kids, it's me, I'm shooting to where I can put my rifle on a rock. I'll put my hat down and we'll put a rifle on a rock. I'll put my backpack down if there's nothing available, lay down on my belly and put my rifle in a backpack. Make sure that I have really good control of the rifle and it's steady. It's exactly where I want it before I squeeze the trigger. So, looking at this shot, remember, we got time. This is time not to be shooting. This is time to make sure we got a solid rest. Once that we're on a good rest and we're looking at this deer and he doesn't know that we're here, we can take our time and make a good shot. So, poor shot placement. We don't have a way to get into where we need to. It's just not a good shot. Second picture. Is this a good shot? You know what? The buck that we're looking at is positioned to where he is in position for a good shot. But what about everything else around him? He's not by himself, and there's definitely a chance that that bullet's going to hit that buck, pass through it at a weird angle, or even where you're at, and hit that deer behind it. There's a chance that you might not hit that deer and hit that deer behind it. See, with the perfect shot, you can hit that deer, take that deer without hitting a deer behind it. But there's a lot of margin for a lot of mistakes right there on that shot. So I wouldn't recommend taking that shot either. Once again, we have more time than what we think we do. And that deer will separate from the does and offer you a good shot at another point in time. Okay, once the critter is down, this is really when the work begins. There's a lot of things that have to go on after the deer is down. First step is to make sure you don't walk up on a deer that's not dead. You'll know, approach safely, slowly, make sure the deer that you've shot is down and dead. Second is to tag your deer immediately. Make sure that it is tagged. You guys received your tag in the mail, and we've got some slides to show, and you'll see how to tag it. On the back is a diagram of different critters, different scenarios you're going to face on how to use that tag. On a deer, on a buck deer, something with an antler, you can place it on the antler. So if you shoot a doe, if you have a doe tag on the kaibab, you can place it on the back leg through the gambrel in such a way that it's not going to slip off the leg or the foot. Here's a picture of a tag being put on there. You take that back off, and there's a right way to tag an animal and there's a wrong way. The correct way to tag an animal is so you can read both sides of the tag. Uh-oh. So don't start with one end and spin it all the way around the antler because you'll only be able to read the end. So the correct way is to start, put it in the middle like that, go end to end, affix it to where the entire tag, all the printed material is visible. Seal it up all the way down to where it isn't going to fall off. So even though you don't just touch the ends, all the way down to the base of the antler, or all the way down to the antler. Field dressing. Have any of you guys ever field dressed a deer? Okay, we're going to go through and show some pictures on how to do it. So start by upside down. Orient the animal on its back with its tail facing downhill. Now, it really helps if you have somebody that is there to help you, but if not, you can either tie off the legs or balance them, place them in such a way that you can get to its underbelly. A few of the myths: you don't bleed an animal, don't cut its throat. So when you walk up to it, the animal's dead, it's not going to bleed anymore, at least laying down like that. So don't cut its throat. And you don't have to cut off any glands to make the meat edible. Whether or not we're talking about a deer and these tarsal glands there on the insides of its hind feet, or a javelina with the musk gland. If you guys have ever went javelina hunting, they have a pretty unique gland right in the lower portion on top of their back. And a lot of people still think that you have to cut that off. You don't. When you skin it, that gland comes right off. It's part of the skin. Doesn't impact or affect the meat in any way. So when you're starting to field dress a deer, now it says cut the genitals free from the body, but depending on where you're hunting and what you're hunting, you have to have proof of what it is that you shot. In Arizona, we have doe hunts and we have buck hunts. So we only have one doe hunt, and that's up in the kaibab. And you can prove what sex you have by the head on the deer, but the genitals are also away. Some states, Arizona's not one of them, but some states require that the genitals still be attached to the animal the entire time. So you have to be able to tell what that is. So proof of sex. So you start, this guy is starting by going around the anus all the way around, and then he goes up and slits the belly. It's not necessarily, you don't have to do it in that order, but there's a few things that have to be done, and that's definitely one of them. You don't have to split the pelvis. It's something that you can do if you have an axe or if you have a bone saw with you. You can split the pelvis. You have to be able to clean out that pelvic girdle in there. Make sure it's clean. We'll have some pictures to show. It's cutting the skin all the way around the anus so we can pull it up through the pelvic girdle. After he's done that, he's cutting a slit up along the belly on the top of the stomach so that he can get in there and reach and take out the intestines and the stomach. Now, this is the part where you have to be very careful because it's going to directly impact how clean of a job when you're gutting this, what you have when you're done. Okay, so you want to really take your time and make sure that you don't puncture the stomach. If you do, the stomach is full of everything that deer or elk has eaten, and if you cut it open, it's going to be inside the body cavity of that deer or elk, and you really want to try to avoid that. So You make an incision. You see that little inset right there where the guy has his hand inside there and the knife is in between his two fingers? He's also doing that in the picture, but you really can't see it. And if you haven't ever done this before, this works very well. So what you do when you're starting that incision, and to start it is really the only key. So when I'm going to field dress a deer, I start by skinning a little area. I tend not to skin that. I don't I don't skin it all the way up and then all the way back. I leave the skin attached to the meat. You understand what I mean? I mean, I'm not pulling off the hide from the abdominal muscles. I'm opening it up, and then I'm starting a small incision, usually lower down in the belly, about where he's at, because it's not real taut. You don't have the organs. You have a little bit of room to get the blade of the knife in there without puncturing the intestines or the bladder or the stomach. So when you get that hole in there, then you're just putting his fingers inside the body cavity, and what it's doing is allowing him to run his knife right inside there while his fingers are moving, and he's keeping the belly away, the stomach, away from the abdominal wall that he's cutting with his knife. Okay? Does that make sense? So it just keeps it out of the way while he's running the edge of his knife up there. Once he has an incision all the way up, then you can see this lower right-hand corner. That's the stomach. That big organ sitting right there full of everything that deer has eaten is right there. And we're trying to go out of our way not to cut that and open that up. If you do, it's green stuff. It's no different than a bunch of chewed up grass, leaves, acorns, whatever it was that he's eating. It has a unique odor, but it's green stuff. It's stuff that you'd recognize. So there's nothing really different inside there. It's just you're going out of your way not to cut it open. Once you have the everything below the diaphragm cut off, or at least exposed, now you got to cut the diaphragm, and this is a part where you need to use your knife. Everything else, after you get that first incision, you can roll a lot of that stuff out and pull a lot of the organs at least out without a lot of knife work. But you're definitely going to have to use your knife when you're going to get into the abdominal or into the chest cavity. That diaphragm is a very taut, very tough muscle. And, you know, that diaphragm is, we all have one just like a deer. That's what expands. When that thing moves, we suck in air. And when it doesn't move, we blow air out. So that is what enables that deer to breathe. That's the muscle that creates a vacuum that draws air into its lungs just like us. That is a very tough muscle. So it has to be cut with a knife. It has to be cut all the way around. It's hard to pull it out. It's attached very well. And so you have to cut that around. And on the back side of that are the heart and lungs. Lower picture, he's cutting around it. Depending on where you're at, you might not have access to anything to be able to split the rib cage. I never actually have done that in a field situation. If I get it back to camp after it's skinned, maybe. But it's pretty easy to do without splitting the rib cage. Depending on if it's got something that you're going to mount, then you'd want to take that into consideration when you're field dressing the animal. So getting back to pulling the things out that you're going to find on the uphill side of that diaphragm, there's going to be an esophagus. That's the tube that connects the food from its mouth to its stomach. Trachea is going to be in there. That goes to the lungs and the heart. So there's a few things you have to cut in there. You reach in, you're going to have to cut the trachea. You're going to have to cut the esophagus. But that stuff comes out. Once the diaphragm's gone, heart and lungs come out of there real easy.
Question.
Sure.
The gentleman there doesn't have any gloves on. What's your recommendation on having gloves?
You know, do whatever you're comfortable with doing. If you want to have gloves, one thing about wearing rubber gloves is your hands are not going to smell like deer for the rest of the day. So I know a lot of people that wear gloves. I should probably carry them and use them, but I don't. But once again, you have bloody hands for the rest of the day. So if you're going to wear gloves, that's absolutely the thing to do. Here we're pulling everything out. of the deer cavity. And here the lower intestines, they're going to come free because that was the first thing that we did in here is we made a cut all the way around the anus. That's going to come right out through the pelvic girdle. And everything inside that deer now, all the organs are going to come right out of that deer. And what's going to be left in the deer is a lot of pooled blood. Careful not to puncture the bladder. So even though you got a lot of blood in there, you'd just as soon not have a lot of urine in there. So that is the picture of the bladder right there. So when you're cutting and pulling that out, try not to have the contents leak into the cavity. Here he is lifting it up and dumping the blood out of there. This is the reason why when they were orienting the deer before they started, they said put the tail end down. You know, gravity always wins in everything in life, and what we're trying to do here is trying to assist in everything falling out of there. Okay, once it's field dressed, particularly in Arizona, it's really important to get this cooled off. So the second step after field dressing, and depending on where I'm at and depending on where you're at, is really going to depend on when it's going to occur. But a couple things have to happen. The first thing that we've done right here is we field dressed it, but we have to have it in such a condition that we can either get it back to our camp, get it back to our truck, and then the next thing we need to do is get the hide off of it to allow that to cool. We want the meat to cool. Your end product, to whether it's something that you process or you take to a meat processor, you want to keep it clean. You want nice, cool, fresh meat because the end product is something that you want to eat. So some people, and now in Arizona, I recommend taking the hide off of it as soon as you can take the hide off of it. Once again, he's able to get this deer whole into his garage. Depending on where you're at in Arizona, the vast majority of the time your deer's going to come back to either your truck or your camp in pieces. So getting back to the picture of equipment that we had a bone saw and we had a pack frame. We had a bunch of rope. And it doesn't matter what we have in Arizona, you can get it back to your truck or camp with those items. If you have a deer, at the point you have it field dressed to where you don't have anything in it, you have nothing but time at this point. So you can either skin it, cut it in half, and drag half of it at a time down to the truck. You can cut it into smaller pieces, put it onto your pack frame, and take it down to your truck. If you're close enough to camp, you're packing it into camp. But once you get it in there, if you're still camping in the area, it's always good to hang quartered meat, whatever the meat is, overnight and get a good chill on it, just to where all that heat, all the body heat is allowed to dissipate, come off of it, and at that point it'll last for quite a while. It'll last for a long time. Certainly until you can get it down to the valley to wherever it is that you're going to have it processed. Now in this picture right here, this is the way we encounter many, many deer in the field. When we're checking hunters, talking to hunters, this is a field-dressed deer hanging in camp. And what they have on that is a deer in a game bag. Whether or not it's a cheesecloth type bag that this is, that its main purpose is to keep the bugs, flies, and meat bees off the carcass. Not so much to keep it clean. You've either brought back something that's clean in camp or something that's less than clean in camp, but that cheesecloth bag is not going to keep it clean. It will keep the bugs off it. It allows circulation, and it's going to allow that meat to cool. You'll see heavier bags that pretty much do the same thing. They're more almost a canvas bag, a lightweight canvas. They're not porous like this cheesecloth. And you could take one of those easily, or a series of them with you when you're out in the field, quarter skin and put a quarter right into that bag, throw it on your pack frame and pack it out easily. It's not necessary that you have a game bag. You'll have flies that will land on it, and you'll have bees that will land on it. And the meat bees will eat a little bit of it, not much. You'd just as soon keep the flies off of it if you could. But depending on where you're at, when you have a deer hanging in camp, if you're on the Kaibab someplace, it's going to be real cool. It will get a good chill to it. Some of the lower desert units, particularly we have a hunt kicking off in a couple weeks. We have a desert hunt in 22 and 23, and I would really recommend that you hang it in the evening. If you're close to town, get it back to town, but hang it, cool it, and When it warms up, when the sun comes up, that carcass is only going to get warmer throughout the day. It's not going to get any cooler than what it was when the sun came up. So if I'm hunting in the desert and we have a deer that we're trying to keep cool for a number of days, I literally will take an old sleeping bag with me, or if my kids are acting up, I'll use one of theirs. And I'll wrap, when the sun comes up and it's warm, when it's starting to warm up, I'll wrap that carcass with a sleeping bag, and I'll make sure I keep it in the shade. You know, a sleeping bag keeps you warm at night, but it keeps your deer cool during the day. And what I'm doing is I'm keeping the coolness inside that deer. Once the sun's down, it starting to cool off again, then you can hang it. And you'd be able to keep a deer in camp in the desert units for 5 or 6 days easily.
Before you cut it up, put it on ice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The carcass hanging just like that right there. At first light, because I don't ever cut up or put something in an ice chest. I never have. You can take a carcass exactly like that, and when it gets lighted, and it has to be good and cool when it warms up, or at daylight, but wrap it up, put it in the shade, and it'll be fine.
If you did have ice, you would recommend still hanging it to get that body heat out?
Absolutely. You know, the problem with ice is the water associated with it. And if it's going to get wet and just sit there, that water becomes problematic. Granted, it's cold, but it's wet. Okay, some of the keys to a quality hunt. Quality hunt doesn't necessarily mean that you have a deer to take home. Quality hunt is just spending time out in the field with you with your kids with you. You're at somewhere other that there's not a TV, there's not a computer. Hopefully your cell phone's not going off. And it's really just a great time to spend out in the field with your family or your kids or your friends. Now a trophy animal, this obviously is a doe. That's actually my daughter about 10 years ago or maybe 12 years ago. And that was her first deer on the Kaibab. And she was pretty happy about that. Photos. Now, when you're out, a lot of times, depending on what it is, you really want to take your time and take a series of good photos. Don't rush this part of it, because photos are neat. Photos are pretty cool. And there's some things that you can do to get good photos, and there's some things that you can't do or don't do that will result in some photos that are not so good. So you can see this photo right here, and I'm notorious for this because I have a camera strap that I have a photo of. It's in the lower left-hand corner of most of my photos. This is my camera strap. But take your time, keep your fingers and your camera straps out of the field of view when you're taking a picture. And you can see this lower picture right here, this lower right-hand picture. And this is something that a lot of times, a lot of the older photos typically showed this, but take your time and try to clean up your deer a little bit. Don't have his tongue hanging out of his mouth. Tuck it back in his mouth. Try to clean up. Take a picture of the side that is the most appealing, because you're going to have people looking at your photos that may or may not hunt. They might not hunt. And what they see in your photo is really going to impact what they think of hunting if they don't hunt. So keep that in mind. So when you're taking your photo, take a look at what it is that you're actually taking a picture of. Pictures of dead wildlife in the back of trucks are pretty common. But you can take a better picture than that for sure. You know, real quick, photography 101. Pay attention to the sun. Sun on the lens of your photo usually means you're going to see the dust on your lens to start with. Try not to take a photo in such a way that the hunter is going to be blinded and have to be squinting his eyes. How you take these photos makes a big difference. You can take some really good pictures. Take photos from different angles. Take a lot of photos. Take more than one. when I take pictures, I'll take a lot of them, and there'll be 2 or 3 out of there. You know, digital photos, you don't have to get them developed, right? You just sit there and look at them, and the ones you don't look, you press delete, and they all go away. So it's real easy to take a set of photos, totally inexpensive and easy to take a lot of them. Here's a picture of a nice antelope buck that this guy went ahead and composed. There's a big javelina. So when you guys are taking a picture of your wildlife, go ahead and take that extra time. I don't know if any of you are at the Kaibab, but on the Kaibab it's mandatory that you check out your deer. So swing by the check station. They're going to go ahead and weigh it. They may take samples, and they're going to document that you were successful. In northern Arizona, specifically the Kaibab, and any more in Unit 10, Unit 9, some of these areas where condors are known to make their way to, we go out of our way on all of our hunts, whether or not it's a deer hunt. It doesn't have to be a juniors hunt. A deer hunt in those areas or an elk hunt south of the canyon, and we're going out of our way and offering non-lead ammunition to people who are drawn for those tags, those hunts. And this is specifically, if you have one of those, then you've already received a coupon in the mail that you can take down to, I believe, Sportsman's Warehouse and get a box of bullets, a box of ammo, non-lead ammo. And this is specifically so that we do not poison condors with lead bullets. So if you have a hunt up there, you've already received it. If you go up there in future years, you will get one. And that's it. So do we have any questions? Nope. And I know the people, folks watching online have had the opportunity to send in some questions. I don't know if they have. I guess that's a no. Okay. Well, thank you for coming, guys. You bet. So what units are you guys hunting in? Where are you at?
Here, 20C.
20C? Uh-huh.
And then next, following weekend, we'll do a juniors only elk, including first elk, elk tag.
Wow, good.
4A.
In 4A. Yeah, that's a good unit. If I don't know if you guys have been up there. There's a lot of elk for sure in 4A. How about you?
He still has to take his hunter safety course.
Hunter safety? Oh, yeah. Next year. Or you have a class you got to take this year. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And have you looked online? I don't know. I know we've recently put them online to where I believe you can take the course online. I'm not sure about a hunter field or a range day. You can pretty much take most of it online, I believe. I'd recommend, if you can, that you attend it in person, because you learn a lot from you learn a lot from the questions that other people ask while you're in a class. I've taken it 4 times with my kids and then myself a long time ago. How about you? 20C. 20C? Okay. Good. Well, thanks for coming, guys. Sure. Uh-huh.
Bury those, or can you leave them lay?
No, and you know, we ask the hunters on the Kaibab and in the Condor range, the people who do not use lead-free bullets, we actually ask them if they would bring their gut pile back in or bury it in such a way that condors can't get to it. But when you're not in a condor area, I would recommend you leave them totally in the open, because what you'll find is that, you know, there's a lot of coyotes and there's a lot of birds that there's nothing that goes to waste in the woods. And oh, absolutely not. No, that's a perfect use for it, is to feed the coyotes and ravens and other critters that are going to come by and eat it. Okay. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.